You won't see me anymore, so I'm gonna have a little session with your machine. Oh, I borrowed your razor, and... well, you'll read all about it.
Welcome to the Cinematic Void Podcast. Cinematic Void is a cult film series that hosts screenings in the Los Angeles area, and hey, we're going to be able to do that very soon in person once again, but we're also going to keep doing those virtual ones. I'm your host, Jim Branscombe, and joining me as always is...
Hey, it's Nick Vance. Paranormal Futures on all these social media platforms. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms. If you want to support The Void, you consider joining our Patreon. Not only do you get cool perks, but you make this podcast as well as a Cinemadness movie possible. All right, Jim, what are we talking about today?
We're kind of going back to one of my favorite subgenres, but not quite exactly. We're going to be talking about Giallo adjacent movies. And what do I mean by Giallo adjacent? I mean movies that didn't come from Italy, weren't directed by people like Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, Sergio Martino, and stuff like that. But films that share, I guess, a similarity, a vibe, a thematic kind of thing together. This is a variety of films. The five we're talking about, I basically picked because I feel like they all kind of go together in many ways, and also kind of like touch different bases of Giallo films. And so as we're talking about these films, obviously we're going to talk about why these films, or at least I and you and other people consider them Giallo adjacent, as well as like other Giallos that kind of are similar in the same vein that you could pair with and do maybe your own double features or triple features at your house or at home or whatever. So yeah, I've been looking forward to this one, mostly because it's five, I think you'll agree, five really, really great classic movies, regardless of genre. For last couple episodes, there's been a few clunkers thrown in there, here and there, and mostly because of the theme. So occasionally you're going to talk about a movie that, not that big into, but today, in this episode, I assure you that all five of these movies are classic bangers. Really excited to talk about them. So I'm going to shut the fuck up now, and we're just going to jump right into it. Our first film we're going to talk about that is Giallo adjacent came out in 1972. It's directed by Robert Altman. Not a name you would think is associated with Giallos at all if you look at his filmography. But this movie is essentially Robert Altman making a Giallo, and it's called Images. The film stars Susanna York, who was in The Silent Partner and Superman, the original one with Christopher Reeves. And she also won a Best Actress award at the Cannes Film Festival for being in Images. The film also stars Renee Auberjonois, who was in bunch of other Robert Altman productions, including MASH, Brewster McCloud, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, as well as another film we'll be talking about a little bit later in this podcast, Eyes of Laura Mars. And it also stars Marcel Bruzzolfi, who was in The French Connection and Z, Hugh Millalis, who had previously been in Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and Katherine Harrison in her film debut. The script was written, and I'm doing quotes as I say written, and we'll get into why in a little bit, by Altman and York. Features cinematography by legendary DP Vilmos Zsigmond, an Academy Award-nominated score by John Williams, and soundscapes by Japanese avant-garde musician Tsutomu Yamashita, who also worked on Phase 4 and The Man Who Fell to Earth. And for those of you who haven't seen Images, first you probably should pause this podcast and go watch it, but if you're not, here's a little summary to fill you in here. A woman writing a children's fantasy story is constantly harassed by visits and communications from people who may or may not be real. When she and her husband pay a visit to their isolated countryside retreat, her childhood home, her experience intensifies, and she resorts to drastic measures to eliminate the problem. So, right off the bat, this is the only time that Robert Altman ever made a horror film. I'm sure, they tried to dismiss it as like, it's a thriller, it's an elevated thriller, that kind of bullshit. No, it's a fucking horror movie. And it's very, very Giallo-esque. Although
I think this is the only Altman I've seen, so I have no real idea what he does.
That's insane. I mean,
yeah.
I think there's a Criterion sale coming up in July. You should pick yourself up some Altman movies.
Actually, you know what? I take it back. I've seen The Long Goodbye.
Okay, so
it gives me maybe a little different side there. But yes, so I've only seen those two. Anyway.
It's fine. They're both really, really good. So I'm not.
Also, I want to throw out Silent Partner, one of my favorite Christmas films.
There you go.
But anyway, sorry to derail everything. Yeah.
Well, and Silent Partner also stars Elliot Gould, who was in The Long Goodbye. So that's her whole tie-in here.
Oh yeah.
It's magic. And I don't know. And as we were saying, like, obviously the theme is Giallo adjacent, but like, we can't really talk about images without the debt this film owes to Ingmar Bergman's persona, as well as Roman Polanski's Repulsion. I mean, obviously, and I think you've seen both of those movies too, it's definitely...
Yes.
There's definitely a through line in there. And the other big takeaway from this movie, it's a masterclass on the use of imagery, sound, and misdirection. Because if you're not paying attention, it's going to fuck you up, because there's a lot of little sneakiness going on, and how like Altman shot it, constructed it, edited, all that stuff. And one last thing before we start diving in a little bit deeper, this was a project Altman had been trying to make since the 60s, and it's kind of part of a loose trilogy with That Cold Day in the Park and Three Women. And if you haven't seen Three Women, definitely pick that up on your next Criterion sale. That movie's phenomenal.
And so those aren't really but you would say that those are nowhere near being Giallo adjacent?
There might be a little bit in Three Women, but like they're not as overt as this. This, those are more on the drama end of it and less like horror thriller elements. This one is like, you have violence and all that stuff. And since we're talking about Giallo-ness, how is this movie Giallo adjacent? Well, so I remember when this came out on DVD back in the, I think, early to mid 2000s, and a mutual friend of ours, Bruce Holchek of Cinemacana, had said, like, you should pick that up. It's Altman doing a Giallo. And I was like, all right, I got to see this, because I've seen other Altman movies that are really, really phenomenal. And I picked it up and was just completely blown away. And it's like, it seriously is, literally, it's like Altman taking his style and running it through a Giallo filter. It's uncanny. But, if you want to get surface level cheeky about it, there's a shot where Rene Auberjonois has on black leather gloves, classic Giallo killer wear, and there's extreme close-ups of him like picking up a phone and stuff like that. So it's like, that's obviously gonna set the tone for Giallo-ness there. And to continue to be cheeky, Altman loved zooms. Who else loves zooms? Italians love zooms. Granted, Altman zooms are a little like slow push-ins and that kind of stuff, which this movie has, whereas like people like Umberto Lenzi love like crash zooms and just zooming all over the fucking place. But the shared love of zooms is another connection that kind of gives images its Giallo-ness. Now, another trait that a lot of Giallos have that share with this movie is the protagonist is an artist. Susanna York's character is a children's author, plus, there's a camera feature prominent in the film that her husband's, setting up that still life with the deer head and the leaves and the guns and stuff like that. So there's kind of weird, like, imagery that wouldn't seem out of the ordinary in a Giallo with that. Plus, Giallo is like the focus on people that have art backgrounds. There's a lot of pianists, musicians, obviously painters, all kinds of artists, that the genre's filled with them. So that's your other connection. And this is a good point to kind of talk about the script. Now, in Altman's original script, York's character wasn't an author, but when they were discussing the script together, she mentioned to Altman that, like, she was working on a children's book called In Search of Unicorns. Altman liked the book so much, he said, would you be okay if you read some passages from your book in the movie? And that's why she got a writing credit. And I think they credit her book at the end, in the end credits, that she's reading. So that's kind of what tied it together. I say vibe-wise, if you're looking for other Giallos that are kind of similar in the vein of images, I'm going to throw a few out there that we've talked about, and pretty recently, actually. I'd say Orgasmo by Umberto Lenzi, starring Carol Baker, All the Colors of the Dark, or A Lizard with a Woman's Skin, which I think Lizard might be the closest out of the three to like what's going on with Images. And the reason why I'm saying those, because all four of those films have female protagonists who are kind of questioning their own reality, because Susanna York's character is like talking to a dead person, seeing dead people, seeing people that are obviously not there. And
a theme we'll talk about a lot today.
Yeah, there's a lot of visions and misdirection and like questioning a reality. Again, it's a Giallo trope that's been used countless times, and Images goes all in on it. Besides the Giallo-ness of it, there's a couple other things that I think kind of fit in there that maybe aren't, well, I'd say Brian De Palma's Sisters, which would be a nice companion piece to this movie too, which is also very Giallo-esque, and George Romero's Season of the Witch, which, not too Giallo-y, but like definitely a similar vibe, and for the hell of it, you can throw in Robert Wise's version of The Haunting too, with the mental collapse into chaos, nightmares, question reality. So it all fits together. Another thing that kind of pushes Images to be very Giallo-like, and it's going to seem weird that we're mentioning this because of the composer, because when you hear this composer, you think of big, grand, like, scores, is John Williams. His score is incredible in this movie, and it's kind of unlike what he normally does. I mean, the score is really experimental, plus, like, the soundscapes going with it. It's, like, a really eerie thing. It's, like, it's cool because it's different from him, because, like, it's not Jaws, it's not fucking Star Wars, it's not Indiana Jones or any of those things. It's a really interesting collection of music. And I was listening to the commentary with Robert Altman when he was talking about, maybe it wasn't a commentary, maybe it's a making up, but he was talking about John Williams, and like he basically had John Williams write a score without the movie being done, and Altman used the pieces that way, because he's like, Altman didn't want to Mickey Mouse the movie, which, if you're not familiar with that term, is like when some people score movies, they do a thing called Mickey Mousing, which is like the cues kind of elevate and accentuate certain things in the movie, like it's just playing along with the movie and just kind of like beefing up things that may or may not work without them, if that makes sense. And
yeah, totally. And
because of Altman's style, Altman's very unconventional in how he makes films, and obviously it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want the score to be so on the fucking nose that it takes away from what we're doing in the movie. So he just let John Williams compose a bunch of stuff and put it in the movie. And I think the results are pretty excellent, I would say. Also in Images, one of my favorite things, has a dummy drop. A pretty good one. It's a dummy going down a waterfall, so Giallos love their dummies. Think of Fulci's The Psychic, or Don't Torture a Duckling, or even All the Colors of the Dark, or Autopsy. Lots of classic dummy drops in the Giallo genre, and Images carries on that tradition. Other things, the putting together the puzzle which reveals the house where she's at the end of the movie. You know how they have that whole puzzle building thing? It's, again, kind of a little Giallo motif. I think of like those extreme close-ups in Argento movies, and people doing like, playing chess, or like playing with little toys and stuff like that. It's a little thing, but it's like, it's in Giallos, and it's like, it's really effective. Usually when those things pop in Giallos, it's to push the story forward, which this does, or reveal something or information. I think about like the countless Argento movies where people are looking for missing paintings or clues and that kind of stuff. So it's like creating the clue. Other things, nightmare sequences and hallucinations. We already hit on a bunch of Giallos that kind of dive into there, like All the Colors of the Dark and Orgasmo and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. We also have Doppelgangers and Ghosts, which is, again, it's the question of reality. And there's a scare that's early on. It's not really telegraphed as a scare, but it's early in the movie when Susanna York is at home waiting for her husband, who comes in, who takes off his pants first, but leaves on his driving gloves, which is a choice. I think I would take the gloves off before taking off the pants, but, where do you stand on this, Nick?
I'm with it. Leave gloves on all day. Let's go.
All right, so you're gloves, no pants. Team
gloves, no pants for sure.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you on that one, but it's fine, But the staging of what happens is that the husband vanishes, and one of the ghosts that she sees, or doppelgangers, or hallucination of like her dead ex-lover, whoever that person really is, pops up, and it's a really good scare. It's kind of reminiscent of some of the like tricks Bava would do in some of his giallos and some of those gothic horrors. Like the one I'm thinking of, even though it came out way after Images, is Shock. There's a scene where like a little boy's like running towards Daria Nicolata's character, and the little boy disappears, and out pops like a grown man demon thing. I wouldn't say it's not done exactly like that, but like the tone and the exchange and the changing of people is kind of in the same vibe, and it's a really good scene. And apparently that was the first scene Altman had worked out when he wrote his script in the 60s, and that was one of the main things that carried over when he finally made this movie. It's also, this sequence is proto Brian De Palma in style, and actually a lot of the scenes are kind of like that, which is, again, I never, wouldn't think to put Brian De Palma and Robert Altman in the same spectrum, other than they were filmmakers that got big in the 70s. But, some of those sequences are planned out, shot selection. There's a scene in there where Susanna York is parked on a hill, and she looks down at her childhood home that they're going to visit, and she sees herself get out of the car and go in the house. And then you cut to the Susanna York character that's in the house, and you never see the Susanna York that's on top of the hill again. Which is just, it's subtle, but when you think about it, it's like, that's fucking crazy.
So something something that I could probably ask about almost every film we're talking about tonight, right? It's just like, and so I think like even I could just start with this first one because it's Altman. So it's like something he's known for something completely different, but totally out of left field, he does this, and it's like, are they doing Giallo? And so same for Brian De Palma, like you just said, or are they doing Hitchcock?
It's a fair point.
And is that what Giallos were doing? Some of them are doing Bava. They're doing Bava. They're doing Hitchcock. So obviously they're pulling from those places. And maybe Altman has seen a bunch of Giallo as well, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm convinced. Maybe he's just doing his version of Hitchcock.
I definitely think there's Hitchcock in there. And you also got to think, the through line is that Hitchcock does have a specter over Giallo in many ways, because he made thrillers. And Giallos are thrillers, and like there's definitely some Hitchcockian moments in a lot of Giallos, and that's a good debate. Is it the funneling of Hitchcock in the 70s what creates a similarity to making these kind of movies Giallo? I don't really know. I've never seen Altman talk about Giallos. I know he mentioned film noir and persona in regards to like Images, but again, film noir going into German creamies goes into Giallo, so it's like,
right, it all makes sense. Yeah,
he might have never seen a Giallo, but his influences are coming from the same place, and it shows.
Right.
And since we're keep on talking about this and Hitchcock and Giallos and creamies and all that stuff, let's talk about the violence and murder sequences. In this movie, they're pretty brutal and nasty and kind of unexpected.
Oh yeah.
Like, we talked about the dummy drop, but like the whole lead up to is Susanna York like thinking she's running down her doppelganger, who in reality is actually her husband, who she hits with a car and sends him flying over the fucking waterfall. There's the ghost that she thinks she shoots, with a shotgun. Like, there's a lot of brutal, nasty violence in it. The violence is Giallo-esque, but the kills aren't necessarily Giallo-esque, if that makes sense.
It fucks with you psychologically because they're so brutal, but then it's like, was that real or not?
Yeah.
And the way that it keeps positioning that every time. I just really like that on it.
No, that's another good point, because like if you look at, she hits a ghost with a bottle of wine or a shell, I forget what it is, but something like that.
Right. It's especially brutal, but do I have to care about it because it wasn't real? That's what,
But was it real? That's the other thing.
Right, exactly. Right, totally.
I mean, it definitely leaves questions to be answered, which is why I really like this movie, because it's ambiguous in what it is, which a lot of Giallos are. And it's also not a very comforting movie because it ends on a pretty bleak, dark note. Is like Susanna York's character is just going full into the madness. She's like, oh, I took care of everything. Or did I just kill a bunch of people that are my friends?
Right.
Don't really know. A couple other things that are Giallo adjacent in this movie. Although it's not really meant to be spelled out in the movie. When I was listening to Altman's commentary, he was talking about the opening sequence where you see a bunch of close-ups of things and like objects, and like he was basically trying to strongly imply an occult element to the movie, even though it's not very overt. But like when you look at some of those things that you see lying around, it kind of brings that up, at least that feeling or vibe, even though it's not like she's not doing like witchy shit or anything like that. It's just like it's kind of in the background, and I think that's kind of cool because a lot of Giallos kind of dip their toes in the occult here and there. And my last thing, big takeaway when I think of images in the lens of a Giallo, is there's a lot of fetishy close-ups on objects, and then there's prominent items in the background that you see there that come into play later, which a lot of Giallos have done too. Like I think specifically the knives on the wall. It's not like really focused, but like it's positioned in a way that you can't miss. There's a rack of knives on the wall, and it's just when are these motherfuckers getting used? So I know there's probably gonna be some debate on this one of how Giallo it is. I think in the spectrum of when it came out, which is early 70s, it's closer to the 60s vibe of those Giallos that are coming out. Not quite Black Glove Killer, but more like psychosexual thrillers, even though like it's not really a psychosexual type movie overtly, but it's there, it's underlying, which goes back to the, paying homage to Repulsion in Persona. So it's definitely there, it's just probably not as overt, but I'd say it's definitely there. This film might have actually been more Giallo-esque if one of the original proposed versions actually happened. At one point, the film was supposed to star Italian legend Sophia Loren, and was supposed to be shot in Milan, which would have, Milan's in Italy, that would have driven home the whole Giallo thing a lot. But, they ended up shooting in Wicklow, Ireland, which is kind of a nondescript part of Ireland. It looks like it could be any countryside, but it definitely still feels like English, European, like countryside, which, again, if you think about a lot of Giallos that went over the UK and Scotland and Ireland and, didn't shoot in Italy, they shot in other countries, mostly to, kind of sell it as a bigger in other markets, so it wasn't just like an Italian export. Those countryside vibes kind of fit into a lot of Giallos too. And I guess for me, I can easily say this is top 3 Altman movie. When you look at those movies, they're all vastly different, but that was Altman's career anyway. Like there's a big difference between, say, The Player and Brewster McCloud or MASH or any of those films. Like he just, stylistically, there was always that through line that is unquestionably a Robert Altman movie, but the topics, the themes, the genres, he liked to spread his wings. So, it makes sense that he would have a horror film in his filmography, and the one he made is Giallo-esque. So, I don't know. If you haven't seen Images yet, highly recommend it, even though we kind of spoiled it. But, really, us talking about it isn't going to spoil how weird, creative, dark, bleak, and what really is a excellent mindfuck of a 70s horror film for you to check out. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, more Giallo-adjacent films coming up on the Cinematic Void podcast.
Who shot off the goddamn gun?
I don't know.
Who shot off the goddamn shotgun in the goddamn house? It wasn't loaded, that's for sure. Who loaded it?
Well, I didn't load it.
You want me dead? Make me dead.
You're dead. Now just stay dead.
Do I scare you? I am a ghost.
Did you call me just now?
No.
I thought I heard you talking to someone.
Oh, I was talking to myself. I do quite often. I do quite often. I do quite often.
moment, old Hugh is with a girl. Probably in bed by now.
You know what you are? You're a schizo.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Giallo adjacent movies here on the Cinematic Void podcast. Up next is, I'd say this one's a little more overt than Images. Wouldn't you agree, Nick?
Yeah, totally. It's a little more straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also pretty unconventional too, which we'll get into. It's from 1973. It's directed by Nicholas Roeg, who did Bad Timing, Walkabout, Eureka, Man Who Fell from Earth. It stars Julia Christie and Donald Sutherland. And it's based on a short story by Daphne du Maurier, who is a favorite of Alfred Hitchcock, who we've already touched upon earlier, who made at least 3 movies based on her works, including The Birds, Jamaica Inn, and Rebecca. And of course, we're talking about Don't Look Now. It features amazing cinematography by Anthony Richmond and a score by Pino Donaggio. And to tie it in with the previous film we just discussed, the editor on this movie, Graham Clifford, was also the editor on Images. So, a little full circle early on here. For those of you who haven't seen Don't Look Now, well, again, you should probably stop this podcast and go watch it because it's one of the great 70s psychological horror movies, let alone Giallo-adjacent movies, let alone just any movie in general. It's one of the great movies. You should fucking see it. Here's a little plot if you haven't. John and Laura Baxter are in Venice when they meet a pair of elderly sisters, one who claims to be a psychic. She insists that she sees the spirit of the Baxter's daughter who recently drowned. Laura is intrigued, but John resists the idea. He, however, seems to have his own psychic flashes, seeing their daughter walk the streets of Venice in a red cloak, as well as Laura and the sisters on a funeral gondola. Wonder why. So, how is Don't Look Now Giallo adjacent? Well, let's just dive in there. Location. Because, obviously, the main location is in Venice, which is in Italy. That's where Giallos are born. But
Not Venice Beach.
Not Venice Beach. There's no Hulk Hogan or Arnold Schwarzenegger in here, brother. Donald Sutherland's not leg dropping a black glove killer or anything. But, you know, the real Venice. I guess the Venice Beach is real, but the classic Venice of movies of the 40s and 50s where people were on gondolas and that kind of stuff. Anyway, getting off topic here already. But besides that location, the opening takes place in the UK, and it's kind of similar vibe to the countryside of Images. And again, as we talked about Images, a lot of Giallos went over to the UK and Ireland and used those kind of locations to kind of spice up the productions and kind of made them more like neutral as opposed to overtly Italian, if that makes sense. So, the other thing this movie has, which kind of does in Images, but this is more obvious because they're pulling bodies out of the fucking Venice, what do you call that, river?
Canal? It's the canal?
Yeah, that's what it is. They're canals. God damn it. There's a killer running around, and they're pulling bodies out of the canal. You also got a murder mystery, and, you know, there's some occult elements. This time, much, much more in your face than Images, which was kind of subtly implied. Again, we kind of touched upon this earlier about death premonitions and hallucinations. We get into psychics and that kind of stuff, which comes into play very heavily in this movie. You got a seance scene, you have Donald Sutherland's character having visions and him struggling with his own psychic abilities. There's also the art aspect, which we talked about in Images. You know, Donald Sutherland's character's job is to restore a church, and when you think of Italian churches, it's like regardless of where you stand on religion, those churches are very artful, they're very pretty, you know. I might not give a shit what the religion is, but like, as a work of art, those churches are they're nice to look at, and there's a lot of art in there, so that ties it in. There's also a classic kind of MacGuffin red herring scare, going back to Hitchcock, which is, you know, another thing that's carried on through Giallos, where like a piece of the church falls and nearly kills Sutherland's character. Where earlier in the movie, Donald Sutherland's character was told by the psychic that he should get the fuck out of Italy because his life's in danger, and he wrongly assumes that this was the premonition. And way wrong he was about that. And as we're talking about the church, we can't get past Catholicism, which is a theme that has been locked in and dissected in many, many, many Giallo movies. You know, commentaries or criticism of the Catholic Church. People like Lucio Fulci, who hated the church. You know, he made a whole movie just basically like as a fuck you, which is don't torture a duckling. So it's a specter over a lot of Giallos, whether it's overt or not. And, you know, we gotta talk about the use of colors. Now, obviously this is not crazy cinematography like gel lighting like, you know, Suspiria or a lot of Bava stuff, but the use of color is very important because a lot of Giallos will focus on colors and stuff. And this movie focuses on two colors that are kind of just throughout the movie, which are like red or green or red and green at the same time. Giallos are very stylized in what they do. Another thing that puts Don't Look Now in that little bit of that Giallo category, dolls. Giallos tend to use a lot of creepy dolls. They're all over the fucking place in these movies. And although it's only one scene, and it's really a recreation of like Donald Sutherland going to try to save his daughter who drowns at the beginning, like it's basically like kind of recreation. He dives in to go save this doll, which is creepy as fuck. I don't know. It's, again, Giallos like their dolls and how they're used and that kind of thing. And this just fits in the vein of it.
We haven't talked enough about the death of his daughter in the film is one of the, you said effective, is one of the most effective. I mean, that death scene is crazy, and the only other like young child death scene I can think of that kind of affected me the same way is maybe like what's his name in like Pet Cemetery. When those kids die, man, and it propels the film, it's fucked.
But, you know, they both deal with grief and how you deal with grief. And obviously the grief in Don't Look Now, that's the driving narrative because you're getting to see two sides of grief. You got Julie Christie's character and Donald Sutherland's character and how they're dealing with grief and how it's essentially tearing apart their marriage. That is a very underlying thing. And actually, underlying is the wrong word. It's very, very out in the open. Like, that's what's going on. Along with Sutherland's psychic visions and like Julie Christie running to the psychics and being told stuff and like just trying to get closure on that grief and like it's
right. They're just unraveling.
Yeah, it literally and like that's you know, Giallo shares a lot of things with psychological horror and like this fits in there pretty comfortably, I'd say. Now another thing which ties in Giallo, but actually not really, but I think it's worth discussing, is Pino Donaggio's score. And it's kind of funny because Pino's Italian, and he's done scores for countless horror movies in the US, and some other Giallo-adjacent films, by mostly directed by Brian De Palma, but he's never really scored any actual Giallos, and especially during the heyday prime of like the mid-70s, and then a little bit later, the late 70s to early 80s boom that happened. Like, he just didn't score them. I guess because he was already getting money from the U.S. to do like things like Tourist Trap and Joe Dante's The Howling and stuff like that.
Was Nicholas Roeg, was he Australian? For some reason I was thinking that he was.
He is British. Probably the reason why you think he's Australian is because of Walkabout.
That's why. Yep. Okay.
Although, now let's double check before I'm wrong here.
Right on.
I'm going to do the rare audible just to make sure. I'm pretty sure he's British,
yeah. But you're correct that it's Walkabout is why I think that. So I could be way off.
Let's see. Nicholas Roeg. He was born in London, England, so he is British.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and he was a longtime cinematographer before he became a director. Like, he shot a couple Corman movies. I think Mask of Red Death was one of them. Could be wrong about that. If I'm wrong, I'm just gonna leave that one. But I know he did like one of the Roger Corman like Poe Gothic horrors. I think it's that one. But I've already used my lifeline to make sure he's actually British and not Australian. So we'll go from there. When I'm thinking of Pino Donaggio and his career, like, I actually looked to see what Giallo films he scored, and these are the only ones I could really find. He did the score to Fulci's Black Cat in 1981, which, although it's not really a Giallo, I did include it with the January Giallo Marathon I did back in 2020, Was it 2000? Yeah, I guess it was. I can't tell. It was one of the last things I got to screen before everything shut down. He also did the score to the late 80s Giallo throwback Fan of the Death for director Ruggero Deodato. And in the 90s, he did the score to Dario Argento's kind of attempt to crack the U.S. market with a sort of high-concept Giallo. Although, it's kind of debatable. I mean, it's Giallo because there is a black glove killer. There's no straight razor, this weird guillotine head thing. But Dario Argento's Trauma, he did the score to that. That's what I'm trying to say without going over long on it. Another thing that kind of places this in the realm of Giallo is the sex scene. Although, I'll say this, a lot of Giallos, especially early on, like to incorporate artsy sex scenes. And sometimes not so artsy sex scenes. For this one, it's not really kind of titillating as like a lot of the ones in Giallo. It's artful, but it's like it's basically a moment, as we already talked about, the unraveling of like Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland's character, and this is one of these rare times that they still have a human connection together, which is being able to make love. And the reason why it's in the movie, because Nicholas Roeg thought like, you guys got to do something else, because like otherwise you're just gonna be arguing the whole movie and just going deeper dark. You got to show that you guys actually loved each other. And it's,
but I do have to mention though that I mean, it is a bit sure, it's a sex scene in a 70s film, but like it goes on a little longer than they normally do. It's a bit more graphic than they usually are. You know, it's no Emmanuel in America, but it's pretty fucking, dare I say, it's pretty racy even for, 2021 standards. Like, you don't see this kind of fucking in a movie.
Yeah. I mean, the scene bothered Julie Christie's boyfriend at the time, Warren Beatty, so much that apparently he saw Nicholas Roeg at a party, took him outside, and punched him in the face.
What the fuck? Right on.
But
I mean, yeah, no, it appears they're fucking in this movie.
Well, there was long standing rumors that like they actually fucked on camera.
Yeah.
And everyone has like basically Anthony Richmond, Nicholas Roeg, Donald Sutherland all said no, it was just we were just doing a scene. Mm-hmm. I looked up to see if Julie Christie ever said anything about it, but I didn't see anything. But like it's graphic, but the other thing you gotta think about is how it's cut together. It's like this montage where it's like you show them getting ready for their day, and then the sex. Mm-hmm. So it's like kind of like bouncing back and forth. So like, I think
true. It's artful, but it's graphic.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It is a little more graphic than like most people were probably expecting, which is probably why a lot of people thought like, well, they obviously fucked on camera.
Yeah.
But according to everyone involved, that didn't happen. Or is that what they want us to think? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Let us know your opinion. Was it a real sex scene or not? Hit us up on the socials. A couple other things when I think about this sex scene, because, as we're saying, Giallos had them. And there's other artful and like kind of fetishy ones. And I think of Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, where like Edwidge Fenwick's character likes to get cut or have glass thrown on her and that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying this is like it's not a kinky sex scene. It's just very matter of fact and I guess kind of graphic. You don't see little Sutherland though.
Yeah. You
don't see what made Kiefer. That's for sure. Let's talk about some similar in the vein Giallos that you could put together with Don't Look Now. First one that came to mind was a couple of Fulci movies, which are Don't Torture a Duckling and The Psychic. And for different reasons. Don't Torture a Duckling because of like the criticism of the Catholic Church and like that kind of stuff in the background, plus child murder. That's where I have the tie-in. And then The Psychic because in Fulci's The Psychic, the character has psychic premonitions, which end up being that character's death. I think, pretty sure Duckling came out the year before Don't Look Now, but Psychic came out later. It should be stated that Don't Look Now definitely had an influence on the Giallos that came after it, for obvious reasons. Because it's like, oh, you can put some prestige behind these movies. So I think there's a little bit of that kind of chase too. Whether they succeed or not, that's really up to you. But there's another Giallo which came out, I believe, the year before Don't Look Now, and it's called Who Saw Her Die, which stars George Lazenby and Sergio Martino favorite Anita Strindberg. They kind of deal with the same things because both deal with the grieving parents and the death of a child. But where Who Saw Her Die kind of differs, it's the parents going looking for the child murderer because there's more murderers happening. Whereas like in Don't Look Now, their daughter drowned and there's just murderers happening in the background, and because of the red raincoat connection, that's what puts Donald Sutherland into that murder spectrum. That's basically what I got on like the Giallo Jason part. But like a couple things I want to kind of talk about, which, you know, as we mentioned at the beginning of the talking about Don't Look Now, Graham Clifford was the editor on this film as well as Images, and I want to do a little aesthetic compare and contrast, just for fun. Now, Robert Altman as a director has always been kind of loose, open to improv, experimenting. Like, you know, that's why he does a lot of zooms. He has a lot of overlapping dialogue. A lot of stuff that wasn't in Images, but like some of those techniques still carried over. And when you think of Nicholas Roeg, he had a very fragmented style, at least at the time, where he likes to deconstruct time, which you think of that sex scene of how the montage is like cutting back and forth in different time places of time. When Donald Sutherland has those like psychic visions, they're kind of cut in. You don't know if it's like an, you know, you don't know it's a premonition until it kind of unfolds. Like it's all about the style. And like Roeg was very much in like creating pure cinema. And he believed in like montage editing and like kind of stream of conscious filmmaking. You know, as he progressed, it got more aggressive. Like if you see something like Eureka, the first hour of Eureka, if you haven't seen Eureka, you should. It's Gene Hackman who finds oil or gold. I forget which one, in the middle of Alaska, and becomes this millionaire, and then they kill him to get his money. And they kill him in a really, really hilariously violent way. They basically set him on fire with a blowtorch. But that's for another podcast. But Roeg just had this very stream of conscious style and just the way he put things together. So even without Graham Clifford editing, he continued on this path. But the thing I like is that I think what kind of gives these movies kind of a little bit of like a sister vibe to each other is probably Graham's contribution to both, because they both have lots of misdirection. They have lots of like, is this real? Is this not? What is this? What is reality? Altman's through like the hallucination factor. Don't Look Now because of the fragment of time and the premonitions. But they kind of go together and they kind of work. Obviously, they're two different movies with two different endings and two different styles, but I think there's a weird cohesiveness when you think about both of them together. I don't know if you agree or disagree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just more coming from the... I see De Palma and Hitchcock and all these through lines throughout. So even the next one, you know, the next one has something or many things in common with this one.
I mean, all these movies can be easily interconnected because the two we talked about thus far share an editor. You know, Pino Donaggio is going to come into play later. The next movie we're going to talk about is related to this one. The movie in between this and the next movie and the last one, the fourth one we're discussing, Eyes of Laura Mars, it goes back because there's a tie-in to Images. So all these movies, in a way, are tied together. It's like the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, except for like films, their connection, and giallo-ness. So I don't know. That's why I've been really excited to do this episode. So before we move off Don't Look Now, what's your final thoughts on this, Nick?
Look now.
Look now.
Look now. Don't do anything else. Watch this movie. Look now.
Yeah, and if you look and you see a person in a red raincoat that's a little short, just keep moving. Just keep moving.
Keep it pushing.
Keep pushing. Otherwise, you might catch a meat cleaver to the neck. My final thoughts is like on this movie. It's a movie I don't revisit often because I've seen it a lot. But like, I mean, I think you were saying the first time you saw this movie was at the Egyptian, right?
I did. I saw it at the Egyptian on film, I believe. Although I don't quote me on that. Maybe quote me on that.
You did, because I think it might have been one of the 2 times we had the BFI's really excellent print of it. Which
I remember being totally beautiful. And yeah, I didn't even know what to expect. I just went into it and I fucking loved it. And it was one of the first, when I started collecting Criterions in the past like 6 months, that was one of the first ones I bought.
And now it's out of print. Got a collector's item there, Hoss.
There we go. That's what I'm looking for.
As I was saying, my final thoughts is like, it's not a movie I revisit often, but when I do, I just kind of get sucked in because it's a really masterfully constructed movie. You know, the Giallo elements kind of, take it over the top. Again, I don't know if Rogue had seen any of them, but like, you're shooting at Venice. You're using an Italian crew for the most part. He might have seen some, but who really knows? I mean, again, this could be a spillover from Hitchcock and all that, as you've already stated. But we're going to take another quick commercial break. But when we return, we're going to keep being adjacent to Giallo here on the Cinematic Void podcast.
They say seeing is believing, but only a split second of time separates the past from the future. The present is crushed between them. A thin thread of life in a skein of death.
Laura! Laura!
Where are you? Who are you looking at?
I don't know what's happening.
You are warned. Things are not what they seem. Don't look now.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Giallos, but not exactly Giallos. Films that are adjacent to Giallos here on the Cinematic Void podcast. Up next is, not only is this film Giallo adjacent, but I'd say it's what I would call a proto-slasher. And what I mean by proto-slasher is any movie that came out before Halloween. That kind of, because once Halloween dropped, that's when the slasher boom came. And anything that came before that was just kind of like building up to it. So things like this, Black Christmas, even Psycho, kind of part of the heritage. The film was from 1976. It stars Linda Miller, Mildred Clinton, Paula Shepherd, and in her film debut, Brooke Shields. That's right, we're talking about Alice Sweet Alice by director Alfred Sole. Now, the film was originally titled Communion, and it was later released as Holy Terror, and briefly for maybe a week somewhere in some drive-in in the middle of nowhere, The Mask Murders. So it's had a few different title changes. I think when you get it on Blu-ray now, the main title card they have is Communion, or Holy Terror, or Alice Sweet Alice. I don't know. I own the Arrow disc, which I think has all three fucking titles on it. But if you haven't seen Alice Sweet Alice, again, correct that shit as soon as possible. So here's a little plot for you. In 1961, a divorced Catholic couple's life is turned upside down when one of their two adolescent daughters is suspected of her younger sister's brutal murder during her first communion. The film also has an extra bit of notoriety for being the, as we already mentioned, the film debut of Brooke Shields, who basically, because when she got famous, this movie is rebranded a bunch of times to put her as the star, even though she's literally in it like 5 minutes and she's a child. So it's a little weird of a flex to be like, you like Blue Lagoon? Check out Brooke Shields and Holy Terror.
Am I wrong that does it say in the title card though introducing Brooke Shields, or did I see that like in a poster?
Maybe later in a poster. She's just listed in the credits normally. There's someone else in the credits has an introducing kind of thing. But like,
also the credits are amazing.
Yeah.
The opening credits are fucking fantastic.
Oh, you're talking about the weird like.
It's like a woman wearing a weird veil over like her whole body and like maybe a crown and like a bunch of weird shit happening. It looks like I don't know, it looks some kind of weird like goth metal record cover that would maybe be whack as a record cover, but as the opening credits to this film, amazing.
Yeah. And it's like almost like a weird stop motion effect because it raises the cross dagger up and all that.
Totally.
When the title hits, like it's a fucking great title for any movie, like title sequence. And I think they did it for all three titles. It has that same imagery. So it's unique that was the one carryover. Not the film title, just that imagery. So let's get into why Alice Sweet Alice is Giallo adjacent. And I think right off the bat, the main reason it is because of the inspiration it pulls from the film we just talked about, Don't Look Now. Now, director Alfred Soule has claimed that he's never seen a Giallo before making Alice, which could be true. And I think, all the Giallo-ness that comes out of it is definitely by proxy of his love and inspiration from Don't Look Now, as well as Hitchcock influences and that kind of stuff. All the things that Giallo pulls from, which we've already talked about, that when other filmmakers pull from, it sometimes ends up giving it that Giallo appearance. In both films, you have a killer who's mistaken as a child. In Don't Look Now, it's a dwarf. In this one, it's a crazy lady who's looking for, purity of getting rid of sinners, And we were talking something about on the break about the killer in Don't Look Now. And I know we're kind of going back, but I think it's worth talking about, which is, one killer has a red raincoat, one has a yellow. But the one point you were making that kind of piqued my interest in why we're kind of retreading a bit here is that, was the killer in Don't Look Now not real? Was it part of the hallucination or the premonition or whatever that was going on that Donald Sutherland was seeing? And what are your thoughts on it, since this is something you brought up?
It ends up being just kind of so absurd. It's like this old lady little person, and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And so that's why that's really what made me think that it was like, in his unraveling and his end was even that part of a figment of his imagination. Maybe he did die, but is that how he died? Is that who the murderer actually was, etc.? It left that very open ended, and I was definitely curious of what you made of the end there.
I mean, I think it was real. I think the choice of a dwarf killer, I've never read the short story that it's based on, but it might be from that. But Don't Look Now, and to an extent, Alice deals with grief and loss. And the thing about Don't Look Now is that it's a movie about grief, and you get no closure, and you really don't get no closure the second that Donald Sutherland takes a fucking meat cleaver to the neck. Man, Don't Look Now is a real downer, now that I think about it. And I guess Images is a downer. This one's a bit of a downer too, but I think they're deserved downers. It's not nihilism for the sake of nihilism, which, Giallo's kind of treading the nihilism too. There's, sometimes there's goofy endings where everyone, they catch the killer and everyone leaves on a speedboat. And then there's other ones where everyone's just left broken, life's destroyed, nowhere to go from here,
Just like real life.
Just like real life. Don't Look Now is not really a fantasy movie. It's a reflection of what's going on in life. At any point, a dwarf with a meat cleaver could take you out. Watch your step. Tables turn, people learn.
That's it.
Shout out to E-Town for the reference. That is only for Nick and I, but anyway.
No remorse, no regret.
Yeah. just keep on going with it. But as we were always saying, you have killers in raincoats, one red, the one in Alice wears yellow. And this, as you were talking about when you saw Don't Look Now at the Egyptian, so this kind of brings back to something I tried to do in 2017. So Will Morris, who used to work for the American Cinematheque, was working on bringing over a print, or he wasn't working on a print. There was a print tour coming through the States of the BFI, British Film Institute's 35mm print of Don't Look Now. And he was arranging it, and he brought it to me first, and we were talking with programming how to do it, and I originally wanted to do a double feature of Don't Look Now and Alice, Sweet Alice. And you and I had two co-workers who were on the short side, Kat and Nadira, shout out to both of them. And had we had done that screening, I was going to buy raincoats, one red, one yellow, and have them just stand up there while I was doing the intro. But
Exploitation.
Hey, man, that's all I deal in is exploitation. The AC, because of the cost of bringing over Don't Look Now, was kind of we'll just do it as a single show. So that didn't happen. Because originally it was going to be part of January Giallo, was that screening. But, That didn't happen, but you got to see Don't Look Now, which is an extraordinary film, and that print is beautiful. Like, it's... I hope it comes back around again, because there's no...
That red raincoat really pops, you know?
Yeah. It really pops. It will haunt your dreams and nightmares.
But anyway, back to the yellow raincoat.
Yeah. So, I didn't end up showing Don't Look Now and Alice together, but I think the next year... Or maybe actually no, it might have been the same year. I can't remember when I did this, but I actually did a screening of Alice, Sweet Alice on 35mm with Lucille Fulci's Don't Torture Duckling. And it kind of melded into a anti-Catholicism double feature because both movies are heavily critical of the Catholic Church. I was actually talking to the director of Alice, Alfred Sohl, who now works as, I believe, either a production designer or something like that in the film industry. He's still working, which is great. And he was going to try to... I think he was working on a Marvel movie of all things. And he was going to try to like work it out so he could come out for the screening. Didn't happen because he was still working, but he was kind enough to shoot a video intro that we played in front of Alice. The other thing I want to mention is where I give a shout out to Will, give another shout out to Will. So when I did the introduction for Alice and Don't Torture Duckling, I dressed up as a priest, Will dressed up as altar boy, and then we took a collection plate and passed it around the theater. And to my surprise, I think we got like $50 out of it. I honestly didn't think we were gonna get anything. It was just a bit. I was expecting like Will's like I had to pull it because people were like throwing real money in. And it's like no, this is just a joke. But then it's at the point you can't give people's money back, but you just kind of take it away. So like I don't know. They already paid to come to see a movie. We don't need to take your money for a fake church offering or whatever. But whatever.
Did anyone donate anything that wasn't money, but like put anything cool in there? Maybe some mushrooms.
Nah.
Pills.
No.
other contraband.
No.
Weapons.
No, it was all money. Some of it was like change, but then like there's some fives, there's a 20 in there. It's just like, man, guys, it's just a bit.
Generous, yeah, right.
And then maybe questions like, maybe I should do church offerings in front of all Void screenings from here on out.
Everyone should tithe 10% to the Void.
Something to think about when we reopen here. Back to, I guess, Alice, Sweet Alice proper, as we've kind of segued in, the comparisons with Don't Look Now and the screening I did. Let's talk about those murder sequences, because they're definitely Giallo-esque, but they also teeter towards really brutal slasher. And I'm not talking about like the Halloween-style slasher. I'm talking about the stuff that came after that, your Friday 13th, The Prowler, My Bloody Valentine, like really graphic violence. Like they're extremely graphic for coming out in 76.
Mean-spirited.
Oh, yeah.
Straight up. Absolutely. Nothing like a giant fucking, just the biggest knife in your kitchen, just ripping through somebody's flesh. It's brutal, man.
I mean, yeah, and it's really well done, and I'm pretty sure they didn't have a lot of money to do it, but like, goddamn, it was effective. And the reason why I'm mentioning proto slasher as in more the terms of like these kills, because like they're not really POV murders. You definitely see Raincoat, that creepy fucking mask, that translucent mask. And you could actually kind of say the same about Umberto Lenzi's eyeball, because you have another killer in a raincoat. This one red. I guess if you're in Italy, it's red. If you're in New Jersey, it's yellow. I don't know if that's
I forgot about that one. Yeah, totally. The fucking raincoat, man.
Yeah.
It's creepy.
Yeah, so like I think these kills are like a little more in line to eyeball, except no disrespect to Umberto, but like I think the kills in Alice Sweet Alice are like above and beyond what's in eyeball.
Oh yeah.
And the murders are really painful, which is reminiscent to the method of murder Argento used in Deep Red, because all those deaths in that movie are extremely painful. You get someone getting scalded with hot water. You get the psychic, which kind of ties in with all the psychics we talk about, the psychic in Deep Red getting hit with the hatchet and then like crashing through the window and hanging out just impaled on glass and stuff like that. And then you get that one guy who gets grabbed by the head and gets his teeth jabbed into like the kind of fireplace mantle or whatever it is, or the desk. I think they move around the room or whatever in Deep Red. But like the murders in Alice are equally as painful. And I think that's why they're so effective.
Again, I say like with the butcher knife thing, it makes me think of it's what they say about like real life killings. Even it's just like when it's done with a knife like that, like there's some like premeditation to like it's like there's something so much more personal about it. And so like you said, it's not POV, but the way it shows the mask and the fucking raincoat coming at you with this fucking knife, it's POV in that sense.
Yeah.
That like that it's not the killer, it's the victim, and you're the fucking victim. It's coming at you, and then you see, and then the camera turns, boom, and you see that knife go in.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that kind of fits into the Giallo staple end of the murder scenes is they're all themed, because this is punishment for sin.
Oh shit.
So,
okay.
You know,
Yeah.
A lot of Giallos have a theme to why people are getting killed, or if they're getting killed, they're killed to a theme. It's, slashers don't really do this, but Giallos rely on this heavily. And, if we're going to talk about murders, we got to talk about that staircase murder. Like, that is a fucking all-timer. It is nasty. It is brutal. It is painful.
Oh, yeah. Again, just that raincoat coming at you, man.
It is nasty.
Between those the bars.
Yeah.
In the stairs,
Yeah.
Oh, fuck yeah.
It's so good. It's so fucking good. And it's like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I enjoy murder, but I'm just saying as a sequence and presented, like, if you're watching horror movies and you're watching Giallos and slashers, you're looking at murder sequences, and this one is just so expertly done. It's kind of crazy to think that Alfred Soul didn't make another like kind of slasher or horror movie like this. He kind of had a nasty streak in him. And then he made a movie where a woman lives on an island with a giant ape, Tanya's Island, and a kind of a slasher horror movie parody, Pandemonium. But he never went back to the viciousness of this movie, which, it's a shame, but maybe it's for the best, because that kind of lets Alice stand on its own. Because, there's a lot of slashers that came out after it that never were as effective as this movie.
Well, another, to its credit, and again, playing off of all those same tropes, he may have claimed to not have been influenced by Giallo or have seen them, but the misdirection in this one he's good at it, man. Like there was multiple times like when and so it reveals who the killer is, maybe 2/3 into it or something like that. And not who I thought it was.
No.
And,
but when you find out, it's like, oh shit. Like,
yeah.
It's actually surprising, because it's just like, I think if this was the first time you watched it when you watched it, so
yeah, totally. It's been in my field of vision for a long time. It has a very iconic, you like, even if you haven't seen it, the mask and the raincoat.
Yeah,
like it's something that's like it's kind of a cult thing that's like it's like just bubbling underground there.
Yeah.
But so I've always been aware of it, but I'm glad I checked it out.
Yeah. The other thing with Alice, which is, it's only been the last few years that it's been finally available on Blu-ray thanks to Arrow. When I first saw it, it was Anchor Bay had put it out on VHS and then DVD, and then some other company ended up putting it out on DVD at some point. So it was like a weird licensing thing. It's kind of funny, and this is, film programming nerd talk here that I'm going to throw in. Like, theatrical rights belong to Warner Brothers, because they distributed it at some point, or maybe they bought out the distributor that had it. So Warner has it, but like home video, it's just been floating around. So like, little tip for programmers: sometimes studios who put out Blu-rays don't own theatrical rights to movies. So it's a little tip. But back to the Gialloism, or Giallo Jasonism of Alice Sweet Alice, and one of my favorite things, going back to images, we get another dummy drop.
Oh yeah,
and it's a good one too. So, hitting those things. Even Alfred Soul might not see in Giallo, but he's hitting those marks pretty damn well. And the other thing, which we've already touched upon, is the Catholicism angle, or rather the criticism of Catholicism. And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier in regards to Don't Torture a Duckling in this film, but like, Alfred Soule was a Catholic. He's no longer a Catholic. I'm going to explain why he's no longer a Catholic here. But he had previously directed an adult film called Deep Sleep. Not sure if that's inspiration for yours and Tony's old band, but...
No, that's a Poison Idea song is actually where that came from. But maybe Poison Idea are familiar with this.
Who knows? But he made this movie. He got obscenity charges against him in New Jersey. And once the Catholic Church found out that he had made it, they excommunicated him so he could no longer be Catholic. Which is pretty strong punishment for making a porn movie that's just trying to make some money, unlike a lot of the crimes the Catholic Church has actually committed and allowed.
He got kicked out of heaven.
But he's better for it because he got to make Alice Sweet Alice. Because,
oh yeah,
I mean...
Which is heaven.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, that's the real heaven. I just found that interesting. It's like, you thought Fulci had some rage against the Catholic Church. Well, he never got excommunicated. That's like the ultimate punishment. It's what they do in Russia when like they kick you out of the country, they excommunicate you and send you to Siberia. Except, I guess Alfred didn't have it that bad. They just excommunicated him and he just went on his day. Made more movies.
He was still in New Jersey, though. He was still in New Jersey.
I mean, I guess if you say that, he's already been excommunicated then. Shout out to our friends in New Jersey.
Hello, friends.
Who probably not going to be our friends much longer after this. A couple other things as we're wrapping up the Giallo adjacentness of this movie. Family dysfunction and child neglect. Both things have popped up here and there in Giallos. You have dysfunctional families. Sometimes it's the family trauma that causes the killer to be born. In this one, it's the family trauma and the child neglect that makes everyone think this little girl's fucking whacking people when it's someone else. And lastly, we kind of hit upon it already, but similar Giallos, obviously Don't Torture a Duckling. Those two are probably thematically the closest. Both have child murder in it. Both have huge criticism of the Catholic Church. And, that's essentially why I paired them together when I did that screening. Another one you can throw in there is a movie called Bloodstained Shadow, which has another, Catholic Church through line in it. And it's not as close in theme as Duckling is to Alice, but if you're doing a triple feature, you would put that at the end. It's a good movie to watch. It's actually a really good Giallo, too, and has a really good score that was written by Stelvo Cipernati, but actually performed by Goblin, which is another reason to check it out. But has nothing to do with Alice Sweet Alice. Just throwing that out there for you if you want to watch some Bloodstained Shadow and need another reason to. And I guess before we wrap things up, here's a cool little fun fact that Bill Lustig, director of Maniac Cop 1 through 3, Vigilante, and who also runs Blue Underground, he's a friend of Alfred Soule's, and he actually worked on this movie. He worked on the effects, and I think he was a cameraman as well. So it's also why this movie ended up at Anchor Bay originally, because Bill was friends with them. They brought it over, and they did the first real restoration on it after it was kind of in limbo.
I'll say there's kind of odd cinematography in this one. Like a really odd framing and weird, like the way that it kind of zooms up and down in certain shots. A lot of weird stuff going on.
I think it's unconventional because, they're shooting a horror movie in New Jersey with no real money, not a really big cast, Their biggest star got famous years later. So I think some of that has to do with how unconventional it was. But I think it all works,
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I don't know. Nick, what are your final thoughts on Alice Sweet Alice?
I thought it was great. I don't know why I waited so long to watch it. I'm glad that I did. And... I just want to give a shout out to the Catholic Church because I think there's a lot of great films that without their influence, they never would have happened. And this is just another one on that pile. The Catholic Church has ruined a lot of lives and made film much better for it.
Yep. I mean, you wouldn't have the devils. You wouldn't have half the nunsploitation, not even half, 100% of the nunsploitation movies that were coming out of Italy and Spain. It's good the Catholic Church pissed so many people off because you got great art out of it. And I guess my closing thought on Alice is kind of reiterate what you said. It's a great movie. I think a lot of people know about it and seen it, but I still think it's a little too under the radar for its own good. And I'm hoping if you haven't watched these, or even if you already have, like, go revisit Alice, because it's a stellar film. Regardless of what you feel about its giallo-ness, it's definitely like, it's a proto-slasher that deserves more credit than I feel like it gets. Hey, either check out or go revisit Alice Sweet Alice sometime soon. But we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we return, we're going to have some eyes on some more giallo-adjacent films on the Cinematic Void podcast.
Brooke Shields in Holy Terror. Alice was too old to play with dolls and too young to make love. Brooke Shields, as you've never seen her before. She was too beautiful to play with boys and too young to play with men. So Alice began to play with death.
She's made repeated requests that the kid see a psychiatrist.
She has a knack of making things look like accidents.
No more dolls, no more toys. Alice only plays with bodies. It's too late to save her. A story of unnatural love and unnatural death. Brooke Shields in Holy Terror. It's too late for prayers.
Welcome back. We've been talking about giallo-adjacent films here on the Cinematic Void podcast, but this time we're going to take a trip to Mars. Well, not the planet Mars. More like...
With Elon?
No. There you go. Oh my God. Well, you don't need a Tesla to go to this Mars. It's a film from 1978. It's directed by Irvin Kershner, who directed a little movie from some franchise that some of you might have heard of called Star Wars. That movie was Empire Strikes Back. He also directed the RoboCop 2, so his career is kind of all over the place. The film stars Faye Dunaway, Tommy Lee Jones, Brad Dourif, Renee Auberjonois, who we already talked about in Images.
I keep getting him confused with Harry from Night Court, which is probably a pretty obscure reference, I guess. But I don't know if anyone remembers Night Court. I don't know. I guess and then I Googled it, and Harry from Night Court is maybe much younger. But I don't know. Sorry, Renee.
I mean, if he was still alive, he would probably take those royalty checks. I don't know if I guess Richard Mole's probably still getting some checks from Night Court at this point. But I guess we should talk about, there's one other actor I want to mention that's actually in this movie we're discussing, which is Raul Julia, who I believe you had a pretty big reaction when you saw him in this one.
Holy shit, it's fucking Gomez in the 70s.
Yeah. I guess most people know Raul Julia as Gomez Addams from those Addams Family movies, and probably...
Just a handsome motherfucker. Forever.
Ever. Was he also M. Bison in that Street Fighter movie?
You got me. You stumped me there.
I think he was.
Believe it or not, I haven't seen the Street Fighter movie.
I haven't either. I just know he was in it with Van Damme. But, we're not talking about Street Fighter. We're talking about Eyes of...
That's the next episode is the Street Fighter episode.
Enough about video games. We're talking about Eyes of Laura Mars, which, I think out of all the movies we're going to talk about, this might be the most dead-on Giallo comparison. And before we get into that, there's a couple other people that worked on this movie I think we should mention. The film's original story and early draft of screenplay was by some guy you may have heard of if you're a fan of Cinematic Void, John Carpenter. Obviously, the John Carpenter directed Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York. The film was then rewritten by David Zelig Goodman, who also wrote Straw Dogs and Logan's Run. We're talking about a lot of very big contrasts here. There's a big difference between Logan's Run and, like, Straw Dogs.
Quite a pedigree, though.
It is. The film was edited by Michael Kahn, who would go on to be Steven Spielberg's longtime editor and work on projects produced by Spielberg and obviously edited most of his movies. For those who haven't seen Laura Mars, and her eyes obviously, Laura Mars can see through the eyes of a serial killer as he commits his crimes. She contacts the police and with the aid of a police detective tries to stop the killer, but first they have to figure out who it is. So, how's this movie Giallo, Jason? Well, the plot itself is straight out of a Giallo, or sounds like a Giallo, just on paper. This movie, probably more so than, except for maybe the last movie we're going to talk about, it's kind of universally hailed as a, quintessential, closest to being an American version of Giallo that came out in the 70s. And I think we can give a lot of credit to that to John Carpenter and whatever remains of his initial script. The reason why I'm saying some of this Giallo-ness comes from Carpenter is because he is, admitted to being a fan of Dario Argento. And, if you listen to the old Halloween commentary with him and Deborah Hill, like, Deborah Hill basically says, like, one of the biggest influences on Halloween was Dario Argento's Deep Red, from Carpenter's score to, like, just the kind of murder mystery, the format, I'm not saying Halloween's, like, operates as a Giallo, because it doesn't, for a lot of reasons, but obviously the through line between Giallo to slasher is definitely there. And, Carpenter was also a big fan of Psycho, which was another big influence on Halloween, which, kind of carries over in this a little bit. Not in the same way. A little bit of the split personality stuff, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, what happened to John Carpenter's original script? Well, originally he had sold the story script to producer Jack H. Harris, who had produced Carpenter's first film, or not really his first film. It became his first film because it was actually his USC thesis film. Jack Harris liked it enough, gave him money to turn into a feature-length film, so that's why Dark Star became John Carpenter's first movie. Harris loved the script. He was showing it around because he was going to independently produce it, but he showed it to another producer friend of his, John Peters, who loved it so much that he optioned the movie for his then-girlfriend, Barbra Streisand, to star in. Streisand eventually passed because she wasn't really into the kinky nature of the story, but she did contribute to it still. She sings the main theme of the movie, which is Prisoner, and it was a modest hit for her. It's kind of weird to think Giallo, Barbra Streisand. Not ever in my life did I figure, like, that would all be in a sentence together. But
Babs
was ready to rip with that track. So with Streisand out of the picture, they brought in Faye Dunaway, who was coming off her Academy Award-winning performance in Network. And while the studio still liked the script, studios got a studio, and so they brought in David Zelig Goldman to do a rewrite. This is what Carpenter said about the finished version of the film. I don't necessarily agree with his assessment, but I can understand why he feels this way, because, he might have felt like he had a better version in there. He might have. I don't know. I still think the movie's really, really good, but, let's hear what Carpenter had to say. It wasn't a pleasant experience. The original script was very good, but it got shat upon. I mean, that alone sounds like a John Carpenter quote anyway, but now that we got the script history out of the way, what's some other ways that makes this movie Giallo-esque? Well, you got a black glove killer, and you got killer POV. And you get killer POV going through Laura Mars' eyes because she's seeing the murders happen. You get some inventive kills thrown in there too. The murders are really well done. There might not be as graphic or as violent as, say, Alice Sweet Alice, but I still think they're pretty well done. The other kind of pushing this into Giallo territory is Laura's a fashion photographer. And if you watch enough Giallos, there's a lot of fashion stuff that happens into it, especially the early 70s ones. Everyone's stylish. Everyone's, wearing, I don't want to say designer, but, hippie chic and, different looks. But, everyone looks like they're dressed to go to a party at any point in the movie. Regardless if they're just, walking to go get a fucking glass of milk out of the fridge or something like that. And, you know, there's plenty of, as I said, giallos that touch upon fashion photography. There's obviously the big one being Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace. There's some of it in Black Belly the Tarantula, and there's a lot of it in Strip Nude for Your Killer. So, fashion, very integral to a lot of giallos.
They even, I guess they use the title, or, you know, there's either a magazine or a book that's hers, you know, a fashion magazine, fashion book called The Eyes of Laura Mars, that has like, that's basically like the poster art is the cover of the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's well done. It's like, it's funny when you see that first shot of the book. I think it even leave out the Laura. It just says The Eyes of Mars on it, which is
okay,
even more kind of weird and artsy kind of thing. But like, it's better than the title font that they throw up at for the actual credits. That's something I wanted to talk about. I feel like the only title sequence that's really good in any of these movies is Alice, Sweet Alice. And that includes the last one we're talking about, because they're just kind of like, you know, Robert Altman's images. And like, I actually posted on Instagram and my stories, and I think I also posted on Twitter, all the title cards for all these movies that we're discussing. And I was kind of struck by just like how plain and boring all those title cards are.
Yeah, most of them were just text on a black background.
And, you know, it doesn't really sell the film. I guess I don't know what kind of, you know, I think of, you know, Deep Red had black text title cards, but you also had that Driving Goblin score, and you had like a kind of a little bit intermission in the middle of the credits when you have the flashback to the murder that spawns what happens in the movie kind of thing. But like, yeah, it's just like, maybe it's just the 70s thing of just like throw up some fucking text over the screen or just a black title card or something like that. But that was something like I never really realized, but just like kind of looking at it, it's like, huh. You know, kind of talking about Laura's art and her photography, you know, her art is violent and, you know, in the movie within the movie, like it was called exploitive to women, which is, you know, funny enough criticism because that's levied against countless giallos all the time, you know, like this movie's misogynist and whatnot. And I don't think her art is like, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, artsy. I think Helmut Lang was one of the people that like contributed photos to it. If not him, like another like kind of big like photographer at the time in the 70s. It's kind of interesting because like it's like this meta criticism in the middle of the movie, which is a criticism that gets levied against giallos. The other thing, and I think this we didn't talk about in Alice because it didn't really pertain to it, but the previous two movies talked about images and Don't Look Now. You had psychic abilities and premonitions, and this movie goes right back in there. God damn it, giallos love their psychics. Think about the psychic in Deep Red, who also can see through the eyes of the killer and gets the vision of like, oh, I know what you did kind of thing, and then gets whacked because of that. Laura can see what the killer's doing, but doesn't know who the killer is, which kind of comes into play. And, you know, you get visions, memories, that kind of stuff. So, again, going back to those psychic tropes.
I wonder if... you know, if the 70s were just like an era in general where in culture, you know, that whole just like tarot reading, psychic mind reader, was that just like prevalent in the culture, or was that, you know, or was that just specifically like aping on like Giallo theme? Like, was that just something that was kind of, you know, in the 80s it was quicksand. But in the 70s it was psychics and tarot cards, and well, you know, that bled into the 80s as well, obviously, but I have a feeling that was heavy in culture at the time.
I'm guessing it had to be, although like there's been plenty of psychics and, you know, seances, because like if you go back to like the 20s and 30s, there's those famous seance photos where they have ectoplasm and stuff, and like, you know, some of them have been proven fake, others haven't. So I think there's always
they're real. They're all real.
Yeah, let's just lean on that. They're all real. But, you know, culture has always been interested in the paranormal and psychics, and a lot of it is fear of death, fear of the unknown, that kind of stuff. And I think in the 70s, when you're coming post-Manson murders, coming out of Vietnam, you're looking for answers. And obviously the hippie culture had pretty much been 187 at that point.
Right, the death of it, yeah, totally. With Manson and Kent State and all that stuff, it was the end of the 60s, the hippie culture.
But what you were getting coming out of that is like a lot of the new age culture, which had been around same time, but like it was becoming more, it's like a lot of hippies went more new age and like got into crystals and stuff like that, and less about free love and fucking smoking grass all the time. Although I'm sure they still did all of that within the new age movement. But I think just around the world, people have always been intrigued by the idea of like getting a tarot reading and this fear of getting a bad tarot reading. I don't know if you've ever actually got a real tarot reading, but like I have.
Your wife Morgan has reached out and offered to do tarot readings for me, and guess what? I won't do it.
I mean,
I won't do it. I'm scared of it.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to be scared about. I mean, what a tarot reading is, I know we're getting off topic here, but what a tarot reading is each card's a mirror. It's just a reflection.
Yeah, exactly. No. I don't want to look in that mirror.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you get a bad tarot reading, you actually have time to change it, because it's saying if you continue on the path you're on now, this is where you're going to end up. But if you make changes in your life, or you do something different, or it's like something.
So the tarot operates on free will.
Yeah, it's like
okay. I hadn't considered that. I like that. Okay.
It's not destiny. It's like basically what a tarot reading is where you're at now. But, the way movies and a lot of places portray it, it's
just like, a crystal ball. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Right. That's not the case. Okay.
The cliche is pulling the death card, which the death card in tarot doesn't represent death. It represents like a new beginning kind of thing. But, how many times have you seen a character get the death card in a fucking any movie and they're like, oh, fuck, I'm cursed or something like that.
Yeah. Either that or it's just the fool.
Yeah.
The fool. I'm fucked.
Well, no, actually, the fool is actually the first card of the tarot, and I know we're getting off topic here, but like,
quite.
Yeah, but but the fool represents like it's like a baby. You can mold the baby to be whatever. You can
Oh, okay, I dig it. Right on. Cool.
It's obviously the fool is completely ignorant to its surroundings. It's there to learn. That's why it's the fool.
But malleable nonetheless.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, there's tarot cards you don't want to see. Like, you don't want to see the Tower, which means it's like shit's about to fall down. You're gonna have to restart, redo a lot of stuff.
9/11.
9/11. Yeah. Tarot predicted 9/11 years before.
Many years ago.
300 to 400 or 500 years ago, whenever like the first tarot card was made. Anyway, back to this movie. I mean, it's relevant because we're talking about like psychics and stuff, but getting past the psychic part of it, this movie also has a lot of red herrings, a lot of misdirection, both classic staples of the Giallo. And, also coming from German creamies, which were influenced by Agatha Christie and Edgar Wallace and other murder mysteries. And, of course, you can go back and look at Hitchcock, you can look at film noir, you can look at German Expressionism. A lot of stuff is just constantly flowing through to the Giallo. Speaking of red herrings, there's actually a really great one, and it's Brad Dourif in this movie. Like, he's set up to be the obvious killer, which... It's so directed that it has to be him, and when it isn't, it's just like, oh shit, No
relation to Steven Dorff.
No, not at all. But Brad Dourif does have a daughter who's been in a franchise he's probably more closely associated, which is the Child's Play series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Brad Dourif's the voice of Chucky, which is...
Oh, no shit, cool.
Yeah, but... Which is why people forget how great of an actor Brad Dourif is. Just watch him in like John Huston's Wise Blood or even Exorcist 3, which I loaned you a copy like 6 months ago that's sitting on your shelf, man.
I mean, I've seen Exorcist 3, but I haven't seen the director's cut.
More power to you. Just coming back, is Brad Dourif's an incredible actor, and he's really great in this movie. And like, I think a lesser actor was the red herring, it wouldn't work. Because there's something about innocence and creepiness and all that works in. Like, he just... And it's because Brad Dourif is so good as this red herring with his, like, weird, like, shit beard. Like, it's... I forget he has a beard half the time because it's, like, so patchy in this movie.
No, dude, he's totally looking like a fucking Hyde from that 70s show.
I mean, that's another way to, like... Well, especially now, that would probably carry over to be, like... That would be a total red herring because, yeah, Hyde's going to end up in a prison cell just like Brad Dourif's character in Exorcist 3, except he deserves it. And we'll leave it at that. But back to Brad Dourif, who is a great, upstanding human being, unlike the person that plays Hyde from that 70s show. You know, his performance is so good in this movie, which is why the twist, the killer reveal, actually works. And let's just throw it out here. Well, this is the spoiler, so if you haven't seen this movie, you want to, pause it right here. Otherwise, it's spoiling time, bitches. Basically, it sets it up flawlessly and leads into Tommy Lee Jones's cop character being the killer.
Check it out. First, you find out that Tommy Lee Jones used to be young, and then you find out he's the fucking killer, bro.
You know, it's weird when you think about it, because I think probably like you, the first time I heard Tommy Lee Jones was because of The Fugitive, which was like 93 or something like that.
Fugitive, but like really, I think of like fucking Men in Black.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah, because like he was a character actor, but he didn't really hit those star roles until way in his career, because like he was in a ton of 70s stuff. He was in Rolling Thunder, he was in this movie. And, you know, funny enough, kind of get off track here, like John Carpenter wrote 2 scripts for movies that he ended up not directing. One of them is this movie. The other one is a movie called Black Moon Rising, and coincidentally enough, both of those movies star Tommy Lee Jones.
Is that a werewolf movie?
No, it's a Black Moon I think Black Moon's like some fancy car that gets stolen that Tommy Lee Jones's character hid money in, so he has to go find the car. It also stars Linda Hamilton.
Don't put Moon in the title if it's not a werewolf movie.
Yeah, that's a big sin right there. But again, get back to Tommy Lee Jones, like it's Brad Dourif's performance, and you know, not taking anything away from Tommy Lee Jones, it's also his performance that lets the twist happen, and it works. It works really good. You know, Giallos love their misdirection for their killer reveals. Sometimes they do good ones. Sometimes it seems like they're just picking a name out of the hat, and that's the killer. This one,
right? Totally.
This one is fully earned, and it's really, really good. And even how he kind of like spills it, like he mistakenly says "I" when he's referring to Brad Dourif character, implying himself, and that's when Faye Dunaway's Laura Mars catches on that he's the killer. And he gives a really great reveal speech and explanation why he's killing. And again, it's kind of a classic, you know, Giallo killer monologue before they get their comeuppance. Like this whole thing, and then sometimes they run off, sometimes they get murdered or by the hero, that kind of thing, which is kind of what happens in this one. But with his explanation, you get into the implication of multiple personalities, which is, you know, obviously this is a bit of a lift from Psycho, because you think of Norman Bates had multiple personalities. He had himself and he had his mother. So, you know, his personalities are struggling in front of Faye Dunaway's Laura Mars, where he basically asks her to kill him because, like, he loves her now. He doesn't want to kill her. So the only way to end it, because there's going to be no relationship between them, because she knows he's the killer, is for her to ace him. And she does. And it's a pretty great ending. The thing is, overall, as we talk about this movie, I don't know if it was intentional, if Irvin Kershner had been watching Giallos, or maybe it was just all the Hitchcock influence, which I think is carried on through all these movies. But for whatever reason, from the staging, the composition, to the fetishy, like, close-ups, the sleaziness of some of it, you know, the fashion aspect, it could have easily been a Italian production in America making this film. It feels that way.
In a lot of ways, all of these people were bringing Hitchcock into the new age of film at the time.
Which is funny, because Hitchcock was still making movies in the 70s. He actually made 2. He made Frenzy, which was, in a way, Frenzy was a little bit Giallo-esque and, you know, proto-slashery. And he also made Family Plot, which deals with psychics and fake psychics and stuff like that. So Hitchcock was still kicking around then, but, like, I think the influence on his big films, be it, you know, Psycho, and, you know, Shadow of the Doubt and Stranger on the Train and those kind of things, That's where the influence of all these come in. So, again, I can't say if Kirshner had seen any Giallos or if it's just Hitchcock, but whatever he did, he nailed the formula perfectly. That's all I can say. A couple similar Giallos, if you want to kind of pair them up. We already mentioned Fulci's The Psychic before. That's a good one. Deep Red, Bird with the Crystal Plumage. A lot of the Argentos really can fit in nice with this. And if you want to get a little more sleazy with it, Strip Nude for Your Killer. Doesn't have any of the psychic stuff, but definitely has the fashion angle. Final thoughts on Laura Mars, Nick?
Hop in your fucking Tesla truck and go to the fucking nearest place you can see Laura Mars. Go buy it, whatever.
I'm always planning January Giallo in advance, and maybe next year Laura Mars' eyes might make an appearance. I think it'd be a fun one to screen. But we're going to take another commercial break, but we're going to return. More Giallo being adjacent here on the Cinematic Void Podcast.
Her world, sensual, dazzling. His world, dangerous, violent. Drawn by a mystery, their lives converge. Faye Dunaway, Tommy Lee Jones, Eyes of Laura Mars. A thrilling vision of romance and terror. Rated R.
Starts Friday at Phipps Penthouse, Perimeter Mall.
Unbearable suspense that keeps you on the edge of an abyss of terror.
Take a cult film odyssey into Cinemadness with Cinematic Void. Based in Los Angeles, Cinematic Void is a film series that specializes in horror and exploitation films. Currently, we are hosting Cinematic Void Up All Night in the Cinemadness movie, a monthly virtual screening series, as well as the Cinematic Void podcast, where we dive deeper into the world of cult cinema. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you like what we do, you can support Cinematic Void by joining our Patreon. Until next time, see you in the void. Welcome back. This is the final film we're discussing here on the Cinematic Void podcast, which we consider Giallo adjacent. And like the previous one we talked about, I think this is another one that's pretty damn close for a lot of reasons, be it the Hitchcock influence or whether if the director had seen any Giallos or not. It's a movie from 1980. It stars Nancy Allen, Keith Gordon, Michael Caine, Angie Dickinson, and Dennis Franz. It's directed by Brian De Palma, so of course we're talking about Dressed to Kill. The film also features another stellar score by Pino Donaggio, who also scored Don't Look Now, and we could honestly have done a whole Giallo-adjacent episode on De Palma films. We could have included Sisters, we could have included Body Double, we could have even included Blowout to some extent, because there's elements in all those movies. I think maybe out of those I mentioned, Sisters is probably the closest besides this one, but I feel like if we're going to talk Giallo, an American Giallo, we have to talk Dressed to Kill. As previously stated, did an episode back in February for the 5 years of Void, we talked about Dressed to Kill with Dario Argento's Tenebrae because it was one of my favorite screenings that I hosted. De Palma has always been steadfast in his admiration of Hitchcock, but always claimed he's never ever seen a Giallo, specifically one by Dario Argento. And then, as we also mentioned in that episode, when I did a Q&A with Nancy Allen, she talked about she went and auditioned for Inferno, which was directed by Dario Argento, which came out the same year this movie did. So I feel De Palma was aware of Argento. I know Argento was aware of De Palma, but obviously I played this movie with Tenebrae for the De Palma versus Argento year I did for January Giallo. So let's just kind of jump right into it. How is Dressed to Kill Giallo adjacent? I mean, really, how isn't it? One, you get the most obvious thing. You get a black glove, straight razor wielding killer.
Boom, right there. Look it up in the dictionary.
I mean, it's textbook. Textbook, goddammit. Besides that, you get a nice sheen of sex and sleaze, which a lot of Giallos have. You get dream sequences, death premonitions. You get the opening shower scene where Angie Dickinson is having a sex dream because she's unfulfilled. But you have that opening, very graphic shower scene.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the unrated version, which is, there's a lot of sleazy Giallo shower scenes as well. There's Crimes of the Black Cat has one. There's one in Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. So, again, and also, obviously, Psycho duh. I mean, I'm sure that's De Palma's main influence, but the sleazy end of it was popping up in like those giallos I mentioned. You also have the ending shower scene with Nancy Allen that kind of like replays that opening one where she gets her throat cut. So, you know, there's all that. You have amateur detective work, which hasn't come out in any of these, but like there's a lot of giallos where like someone gets forced to either prove their innocence or they need to solve the crime for some reason. Like, you know, Deep Red, David Hemming's character gets thrown in that. And an interesting part of this like amateur detective stuff. So the amateur detectives movie is Nancy Allen's like sex worker, and Keith Gordon's like super nerd kid who's the son, or his character's the son of Angie Dickinson, who gets murdered in the movie. So in real life, Keith Gordon's character is based on Brian De Palma and something that happened in his childhood. When he was a kid, his mother and him, I guess, had a feeling that his father was having an affair. So a lot of the stuff you see Keith Gordon do in this movie, surveillance and like, you know, setting up cameras and like recording stuff, De Palma did this as a kid and actually caught his father cheating on his mother.
Wow, dude. That's crazy. That's crazy. Like, leave him. That's rough, dude.
I mean, you're also thinking, like, when De Palma was a kid, it was probably, like, 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Maybe 60. Sure. So you can't track someone's GPS or internet stuff. Like, if you're going to find out the dirt, you had to go get the dirt. The thing is, I feel like this also explains a lot of the voyeurisms and the way sex is portrayed in De Palma movies was that childhood experience, but we're not going to get into psychoanalysis on De Palma, but we will about this film. So let's talk about what really drives home that this is the American version of a giallo. It's that elevator murder. It's an all-timer giallo kill. I'd say it's an all-time slasher kill. Hell, I'd say it's an all-timer in erotic thriller kills. Like, it's masterful. The staging, the violence, the way Nancy Allen catches the glimpse of the killer, that little like reflecting mirror, and then like grabs the razor as it's falling. It's so good, so well done. It's nasty, it's brutal. It's really comparable to like the very, very like elaborate and stylized violence of Dario Argento.
Absolutely, that same use of mirrors they used in like not the same use, but use of mirrors they used in like Eyes of Laura Mars. Like that's something that I'm a total sucker for. So like when you start throwing out some like mirror shit, I'm like, let's fucking go. You've got my attention.
And then there's other things in this movie. There's the Nancy Allen's character being attacked on the subway. I mean, obviously she doesn't get murdered, but it's another expertly done like sequence that could be in any giallo, really, you know. Showboating sequences, you know. This might be more of a specific comparison to De Palma and Argento because they both like to do not only showboaty murder scenes, but showboaty scenes in general. And the biggest one of this movie is when Angie Dickinson's walking around the museum, and it's the cat and mouse kind of flirty game with that guy that she ends up like going home or going to his house and fucking. But that whole setup, like the cutting, all that stuff is just really masterful. And De Palma did it so well. Like there's sequences like that and Blowout and stuff like that. Like it's just, that was his bag. That was Argento's bag, which is why they kind of get outside the looming shadow of Hitchcock that covers both of them. That's why they get a lot of comparisons. Another thing that giallos tend to have, but we haven't really talked about because it hasn't come up in the other ones, is psychoanalyst. You know, there's a few other giallos that dip into it. Sometimes it's like people going to therapy, trying to get over some trauma. Other times it's like a therapist being brought in to help solve the crime and trying to dissect why the killer's doing that kind of stuff. This one's a bit of a red herring, which we'll get into in a little bit. But first, we got to talk about cops. We had a certain kind of cop in Laura Mars. You had Tommy Lee Jones's character, who's comes off empathetic, even though he ends up being the killer because of his split personalities. Then you have the over this shit cop Dennis Franz in this movie, where anything Nancy Allen says, he's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, you need to find this person, otherwise you're going to jail, kind of thing. It's really great. You know, it's kind of a throwback to like a lot of the tough guy cops in a lot of 70s giallos, especially when they started drifting more towards Eurocrime and less away from like thriller, when they got more police heavy and that kind of stuff. You also get a red herring. You have the blonde woman who's following around Nancy Allen's character that ends up being an undercover cop. And you also have the red herring of the voicemails from Bobby, who is the transgender alleged former client to Michael Caine's Dr. Elliot. But it turns out Dr. Elliot and Bobby are one and the same. Which brings us to split personalities once again. I think this is, I'd say, like the third film we've talked about now that has tread into this territory. Images, Eyes of Laura Mars, and now this one. And it deals with Michael Caine's split personality of Dr. Elliot and Bobby. And obviously this is another nod to Psycho, because you get Norman Bates and Mrs. Bates. However, this movie now treads into something we haven't brought up yet, which is the representation of transgender characters. And we can't really avoid it because it's a big part of this movie. Now, in Giallos, there have been plenty of instances of transgender characters appearing, and to mixed results. Sometimes they're portrayed positively, other times they're portrayed as the butt of a joke. Argento has actually portrayed or had a lot of transgender characters in his movies. The Bird with Crystal Plumage has a kind of like a trans bar.
Well, I'll just say Psycho, really. Just, this ultimately comes from Psycho and Norman Bates, turning into his mom or whatever, which wasn't,
Yeah, I mean, it was a different thing then, but like by the time 80s hit, like, there was a lot of transgender people. There was like sex operations that were happening and becoming, more available and more safely available. And like, in order to, if you wanted to get a sex change operation, you had to go to a psychiatrist, at least at that time. I don't know what the requirements are now, but like, it was a thing. And obviously, because in Europe where Argento was making his movies, I mean, even in Tenebrae, he actually had a transgender actor, Eva Robbins, in it. She was the woman that wears the red shoes that shoves the heel into the young Peter Neal's mouth during those flashback scenes.
Right on.
So it's kind of weird in Italy, like, sex and transgender and gay politics and like representation were like, at times it was progressive, at times it was regressive. But in the US they tended to be more regressive, which is when we got to talk about Dress to Kill. Is it a positive portrayal of trans people? Nope. Not in this. No. And there's a lot of discourse about it, and I've seen trans people write articles like liking the movie, but having their criticism about the movie. I've seen trans people who absolutely hate it, along with Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that. I've seen film critics reevaluate it because, the discourse kind of kicked up when it hit Criterion on Blu-ray for the first time in 2015, and then it came up again for the film's 40th anniversary. So, it's a mixed mash of things, and I'm not a trans person, so I'm not going to tell a trans person how they feel about this movie, honestly. But I'm going to put this quote from Brian De Palma on the transphobic aspects of the film. This is from a 2016 interview in Entertainment Weekly. He said, "I don't know what the transgender community would think of the film now. Obviously, I realize that it's not good for their image to be transgender and also be portrayed as a psychotic murderer. But I think the perception passes with time. We're in a different time now." And then he added that he was glad the film has become a favorite of the gay community, which he attributed to it being the flamboyance of the film.
And that was my only comment, was really just notably the passing of time. Culture's changed significantly.
I think we're trying to advance to be better. And obviously, the thing is just transgender killers. There's a lot of horror movies that lean into it, from like Sleepaway Camp to like Hide and Go Shriek. It's a genre staple, but these are exploitation movies, so everyone's getting exploited. But understandably, if you're a community that's marginalized, these kind of things hit a lot harder than say, oh, it's another white dude that's a serial killer, That has no bearing on me, but as someone that's been persecuted and accused of being a monster, it hits a little different. But I wanted to throw the De Palma quote in there, not because he's not trying to justify the film. He's basically saying, I made a film at a certain point in time, and it's a bad take, and it aged poorly, but there's other things to take away from the movie.
Yeah, Context matters. Context does matter. And he's not like fuck you. He's hey, this.
Exactly. But talking about the transgender aspect and the transphobic aspect, you get into another main theme that's in a lot of giallos, which is really heavy and plays in this more, is the theme of repression. The amount of giallo killers who are repressed and lash out is because they're repressed is staggering. Repression comes in many forms in these movies, but, sexual repression and childhood trauma are usually the big two, and sometimes they end up going together. Now, obviously, Dr. Elliot, Michael Caine's character, is double repressed in this movie. Elliot won't allow himself to fuck Angie Dickinson's character when she comes in and say, will you make love to me? He's like, no, I can't do it because I'm a professional. And then, on the flip side, he's repressing the Bobby side of himself because she wants to become a full woman, and because he's like, nah, I still like women. This weird, complicated thing that doesn't work. I guess it falls into the split personality thing, It's like, it's double repression. And then the two characters in the movie that aren't repressed, you get two different perspectives on it. One of them's Angie Dickinson's character, who ultimately pays the price when she decides, I don't want to be repressed, I want to live my life. Which is why she goes home doesn't go home. That's why she hops in the cab with a dude, goes back to his apartment, and fucks him. And she kind of gets, double punished for letting go of her own repressions and hangups. First, she discovers the guy has an STD. And second, and more tragically, she gets murdered. But then, the other unrepressed character you have in the movie.
And again, that was the elevator murder that was quite vicious.
Yeah.
With the reflection and all that stuff. Great scene. One of the best scenes in the whole film, for sure.
Yeah, like I said, it's an all-timer murder in any horror movie, let alone Giallo / whatever. And although I can't confirm this, but I do have a hunch that Angie's arc in this movie was probably a little bit of inspiration, or possibly being parodied by Lucia Fulci in New York Ripper with Alexandra Del Colle's character. She's the one that goes to all the different sex clubs and is looking for dudes. She's the one that gets foot fucked. So there's definitely parallel where she crosses line, sleeps with someone that seems like a bad idea, and then gets murdered. Mm-hmm. And in a very similar graphic fashion to Angie Dickinson's elevator murder. But this also leads into the other unrepressed character in this movie, who, obviously, the dated transphobic aspects of the movie, no longer work. But the interesting thing is Nancy's character is a sex worker, and it comes off as progressive because, one, she doesn't have a pimp, she's working for herself. Two, she's looking how to make money in other avenues, like the guy she's with, that when they walk up to the elevator, she's getting stock tips. She's a businesswoman, which is kind of where sex work culture is headed in the last few years. Obviously, there's still people that have a stigma about it, but in a way, she's a sex positive character. But funny enough, at the time when the movie came out, a lot of people hated her performance. And I think the reason why, because funny enough, Angie Dickinson, everyone's like, oh, she should have got an Oscar nomination for all that. Angie's just playing the overglorified Janet Leigh character in this. She's the red herring murderer of the bigger star who gets whacked early in the movie. It's kind of weird that the victim gets more praise than the person that's solving the crime. Which is why I think while some things in Dress to Kill haven't aged well, this is one of the things that has come into age. It's kind of an interesting dynamic that goes with this. And, Giallos have had their fair share of strong women who are, very sexual, but also smart, resourceful. I think Edwidge Fenech, who we already mentioned, who's in, a ton of Sergio Martino Giallos. This could be a role that she would have played. A couple more things before we close on Dress to Kill. Similar Giallos. Obviously, Tenebrae. I programmed them because I think there is a through line between both those movies and what they're tackling, and they're both dealing with repression. Peter Neal in Tenebrae is repressed because of his childhood trauma, except he uses another killer who he kills to basically do his own murders kind of thing. And another one which, funny enough, when I was first pitching Cinematic Void, I think I mentioned this in the 5 Years of Void podcast as well, was one of my early pitches was Dress to Kill, Tenebrae, and Lucio Fulci's New York Ripper as a triple bill. Because I feel like they all tread in the same sleazy waters, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of through lines to them. What are your final thoughts on Dress to Kill, Nick?
I'm a big De Palma fan, especially this era in general. So like, it's a fucking win for me, man. I love Dress to Kill. I love Blowout. Like when De Palma was doing Hitchcock again, when De Palma was doing Hitchcock, Sisters, Obsession, dude, all that shit is fucking sick as hell. So Dress to Kill, Dress to Kill, you know what? Dress to Kill is probably the best of them all.
Personally, I go Blowout over Dress to Kill, but like it's hairs.
Okay, yeah, you're probably right. I'm getting a little excited.
Yeah,
probably Blowout, but I'm getting a little excited. But Dress to Kill is sick as hell.
All right, we're gonna take one last commercial break, but when we return, it's gonna be time for Read, Watch, and Listen here on the Cinematic Void podcast.
Brian De Palma, the master of the macabre, invites you to a showing of the latest fashion in murder. Dressed to Kill. Michael Caine, Angie Dickinson, Nancy Allen. Dressed to Kill. Murder, Made to Order by Brian De Palma. Coming to a theater near you July 25th.
Welcome back. It's now time for on the Cinematic Void podcast, where we talk about all the things we've been reading, watching, and or listening to since the last time we recorded a podcast. Nick, why don't you tell me what you've been reading, watching, and or listening to?
So I haven't reading a damn thing, so I'll skip that. Actually, I've been going back over the Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson, after I just finished the second Cosmic Trigger book. So now I'm just rereading the first one. But beyond that, I just watched No Reason, which I just got from Unearthed Films, which we seem to talk about at every episode at this point.
Is it by the guy that did Burning Moon?
Yeah, it is. So No Reason is actually a film from 2010. It's by Olaf Itterbach, who did Burning Moon. And I haven't seen Burning Moon actually, but I know it's kind of notorious. So I just saw that this came out on Unearthed, and I'm like, hey, I'll just check it out. And it's wild, man. It's only about an hour long. This woman kind of plays backwards like Memento or Irreversible or something like that. This woman, kind of dies at the beginning and then ends up in hell, and she's going through the different levels of hell. And I don't know if I love it or I don't know if it's a good movie, but I really liked it and really enjoyed really enjoyed how fucked up it is. And there's Hellraiser parts and kind of parts that are similar to Saw. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of things, but kind of to its credit for some reason. The different stages of hell are these different torturous. I don't know. It's kind of it's garbage. It's garbage film, but I love I love it, man. And I wanna. It's artful. It's artful garbage. I don't know, man. That sounds harsh, but I recommend it. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
It's filthy. It's filthy and violent and vile. And she wakes up in hell in a pile of fucking limbs. That's just straight out of a Pig Destroyer song from the 90s. Period. Prowler in the Yard, bro. Right? It's fucking just ill. She wakes up in a pile of limbs, and it's actually foul. If I say it's foul, it's foul.
I mean, that's all you've been watching lately, so
yeah. So that's what's up with that, and that's actually I think the last time since the last we spoke, aside from some of the films that we watched, for the show this week, This is really the only thing I've watched aside from like watching a few of the Decalogue episodes. The Krzysztof Kieslowski, Polish director. Like I've watched some of those episodes of Decalogue, but otherwise I've been kind of busy, so just not watching a whole lot of stuff. Music wise, I've just been feeling a bunch of death metal lately, so I've been listening to the 200 Stab Wounds record on Maggot Stomp. Opening the Hell Gates by Fulci just came out on cassette on Maggot Stomp. I just grabbed one of those, and Fulci is a sick death metal band from Italy. Also from Italy, which is kind of funny and cool. Like that they're that much of dicks. Like it seems like they have a sense of humor, you know? They're just like, we're from Italy, so fuck you. We're gonna name our band Fulci. And luckily they're good enough that, like, you know what I mean? Like if you name your band Fulci, you better be sick as hell. And I think that they actually live up to their name. This is their first LP, and Maggot Stomp just reissued it on cassette for just an American release. But they do have another record called Tropical Sun, and I highly recommend that as well. Fulci is like one of the best death metal bands going right now. It's just simple, old school, caveman, fucked up, horror related, just sick shit. So Fulci, another new karate. Not new karate record, but another karate reissue just happened on Numero Groups. That's streaming now. A bed in the ocean. Been listening to that, and I've been listening to the Anenzophalia Ephemeral Dawn record, which is like a industrial noise electronic kind of record that's just moody and fucked up, and it'll ruin your day.
Sounds very upbeat, Nick.
Yep, you know me.
Yeah. So for my reading, been slacking on that shit, so I ain't read a fucking thing. But I've also been kind of busy, so it's sitting down to read is kind of hard. Also, I've been watching a lot of stuff. The only thing I put down that I watched recently was Bahakala, which is the infamous Bollywood remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was recently put out on Blu-ray by the homies at Massacre Video. So what you get is a close reimagining of Elm Street, but because it's a Bollywood production, you get musical numbers thrown in. And probably an unauthorized use of Michael Jackson's Thriller. But it's a lot of fun, even though it's like 2 hours plus, but all Bollywood movies are that way. You know, I think back when like Bruce Holchek used to get copies of different Bollywood movies and we would watch them for movie nights, and they were all like 3 hours long. But I have to ask him about it when we have him on the podcast coming up about the I Know What You Did Last Summer Bollywood remake, which was absolutely insane. So we're supposed to talk Bigfoot with Bruce, but we'll probably talk some Bollywood too. For my listen, I had this song stuck in my head. It's Alan Tam's The World Has Gone Crazy from the soundtrack of Ringo Lam's Full Contact, which is one of the best heroic bloodshed movies ever made. I couldn't get this fucking song out of my head. I found it on Apple Music finally, but like I searched his name, but all the song titles were in Chinese. So it took me forever to find it, but once I did, it's like, yes. So I threw that on repeat. The only other record I've been listening to, and I don't have explanation as why, is Journey Frontiers. Mostly Worlds Apart, because that's a fucking banger. I don't know.
Yeah, Journey's sick.
I mean, when I take my edible at night, like going to sleep, I listen to that, and those drums fucking hit hard, son. Not even
Hell
joking.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Respect.
So that's all I got for rewatching. But that wraps up this episode of the Cinematic Void podcast. I want to throw out some things that are coming up soon. We're going to have a trip to Camp Void coming up, as well as a Bigfoot episode we already alluded to with Bruce Holchek, so keep your ears open for those. Coming up on the Cinemadness movie, the next one will be Friday, June 25th, and is presented by, incidentally enough, our friends at Massacre Video. And before you ask, it's going to be a bit lighter than the Fetus screening, so if you were expecting extreme gore and really fucked up shit, this won't be the one, but it's a really fun movie, so can't wait for you guys to check it out. And coming later this summer, Cinematic Void will be back in theaters, goddammit. Really excited about it. We'll be screening films over the Los Feliz 3. It's part of the American Cinemathex residency while the Egyptian theater is being fixed up. So I can't really share what I'm showing yet because we're still working on dates. I do know what movie, and all I will say is my tagline for it is bringing the Hollywood sleaze to the Los Feliz 3. So
It's right by Danzig's old house.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the old the house that's all black with the shitty shutters and dead grass
with the bricks out front.
Yeah. I think he still lives there.
I think he lives in Lucille Ball's old house now, over in Beverly Hills.
That tracks. That does track, but until next time, see you in the void.
I'm not going to be able to finish this puzzle. There's too many pieces missing.
They should be there. I know where they are.